Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Morgan and I run the Influential Leaders Group program. And with me today, I have David Leahy from Great People Inside. Welcome, David. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks a million, Sarah. Great to have the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, good. And look, I'd love to hear more about you. So tell me a little bit about how you've come along as Great People Inside owner.
Yeah. So my background has been in the corporate world. I spent, you can look at my grey hair, it'll tell you I spent many years in the corporate world. And approximately 15 years ago, following some executive coaching that I had received, I decided to, I received some really deep, rich insights. I decided to pursue some further education in that area and became an accredited organization coach with the Institute of Executive Coaching and Leadership in Sydney. And over that time, I've used, as a coach, I worked with, I was very lucky to work with, organizations in USA, Europe, Australia with, C-suite level clients, middle managers, etc. I always used some form of diagnostic. And I used diagnostics that most of us would be familiar with. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I came across Great People Inside, and I really liked what was unique about it, which was the fact that it was customizable. So it allowed me just to really pinpoint what it was I wanted to measure and to structure that for the person that I was looking to develop.
And that's what I love about it too. And that's what attracted me. I just thought you can really work on who it is that what is it that you want to know about the job role or the person and work on the attributes. So that's one of the reasons why we've collaborated and joined together today. So yes. Thank you, David. Tell me, just before we go into it, tell us a little bit about you and what do you do in your spare time?
Oh, so what do I do in my spare time? So in my spare time, I'm a very keen, I'd like to say I'm a keen sportsman, but I'm more a keen armchair sportsman. So I love my European football and I love my soccer. But what I really find most relaxing and most enjoyable outside spending time with my family and friends, etc., is I really enjoy painting. Now, I don't mean the artistic type of painting as in the easel and going out and painting a tree. This is the one where you paint skirtings, architraves, and ceilings.
I thought you were going to tell me graffiti writing.
Skirtings, architraves, and ceilings and doors. So give me a, Billy Joel belting it out on Spotify on the headset and a tin of paint, and I'll paint up a storm. And I love it. It's very relaxing.
That's another great reason to have you in anybody's network. You're my new best friend.
I'm not licensed, unfortunately. I'm not licensed. So it is something that I just do, as I say, to just chill me out a little bit and help me relax and be present. It's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure you'll have lots of friends ringing you as they're fixing up their houses and moving.
More than happy to help. More than happy to help.
You're a valuable friend. So, yes. Obviously we use the assessment tools from GPI to help us understand ourselves. And, tell us a little bit about why is it important for someone to recognize their strengths and their weaknesses and have that as self-awareness? What do you?
Look, I think it's been very evident that leaders have known that behavioral science tells us that to know who we are, both our strengths and our weaknesses, is critical. So you need to know who you are if you're going to develop the strategies you need to grow and develop as a leader and as a manager. And so I do think that that's highly important, that people just need to be open to learning more about themselves on an ongoing basis.
On that, have you ever come across someone that wasn't really self-aware and hadn't taken any of these assessments to understand where they're at? What are the negatives? What are the pains that they're going to have if they're not doing this?
So I've got stories. How long have you got? I've got stories where I've worked with highly successful leaders who were not very aware, not very self-aware, and I think the challenges that presents is that you can sometimes think you have a strength. So let's say it's communication. I'm a great communicator. But what happens if you overuse that strength? So you tend to think that communication is more about what goes this way, so the talking, rather than what goes this way, the listening. And so that double-edged sword of being aware about who you are and that double-edged sword of understanding what your strengths are really helps you to perform better as a leader. I worked with many leaders over the years. I worked with one particular very successful entrepreneurial leader, and one of his key strengths was his energy levels, as most entrepreneurs have. Most entrepreneurs have very high energy levels, they move really quickly. I like to describe them as saying, and I hope nobody's having their breakfast when they're listening to this, but I like to describe them as saying that they have a mind like a bucket of worms. So if you look into a bucket of worms, it's constantly churning and constantly moving. And so this particular leader was like that. He had a mind like a bucket of worms. It wasn't uncommon to receive communications early in the morning, late at night. His mind was always turning. But the challenge he had was that he wasn't aware of that. And so what happened in his leadership team was that they became frustrated because while they had good energy levels, moderate energy levels, they struggled to keep up with him. And so what their experience, how they experienced his particular style, was that he'd moved on to strategic topic number 4, and they're only catching up with number 1. And so they became very frustrated and very, I suppose they felt it was very erratic,
Yes.
not erotic, erratic. And it was very erratic in terms of he just jumped from one thing to the next, unknowingly putting his team off, where what happened was they tended to feel that why bother, you know?
Yeah.
Why bother, you know, because you're double guessing, you know?
Yeah.
And I've also worked, talking about the communication side of things for a minute, I personally worked with a really good leader, a great guy, and he was an outstanding communicator. Not a great listener, but outstanding communicator. In terms of his language capability, his knowledge of the English language in which he communicated, his ability to get his point across was just second to none. But I've many recollections in my corporate days sitting in a boardroom where the conversation would become a little bit robust.
Yes.
And this leader lacked a lot of self-awareness. And so he, when the conversation became robust, would tend to, and I have to use my hand to show you, he would sit on the other side of the boardroom table and go, Sarah, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. No, it's no joke.
Oh,
and
wow.
so again, the same situation happened where you go, the mind is already made up. Why bother? So these are little examples of why it's really important to be aware of your own style and your communication and your strengths and weaknesses. You know?
Yeah.
And
Well, I think it's important when you're trying to muster a team, when you're trying to build a team, bring people on and work, but also delegating. You know, I've had the same example where someone's come in, they're a great communicator, but they're not great listeners and they're not great at adjusting their communication style. So I think that self-awareness helps you to make those regulations and adjust for the person that you're communicating to so that you get the most out of them. You know, I had one scenario where a lady, a business owner, was coming through and she was delegating, but the way she was delegating was her style. So, if, you know, if the person was the same person and had same behavior style as her, there probably wouldn't have been an issue, but they were in fact actually opposite. So again, that disengagement starts to happen. The negative culture builds in, and it can be, destroy a whole business within weeks from
absolutely. I mean, and you know that old expression of a fish rots from the head.
Yes.
You know, and that's actually what happens in an organization is that, you know, if the leader is creating it unknowingly, and a lot of, like, most people, I appreciate that most people come from a good place. You know, they're not evil people. They're not behaving in a particular way. It's
but
just who they are.
They're not aware.
Correct.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? I think if once you're aware, then awareness is the first step of resolving any issue that they have.
Correct. Yeah. If you don't know about it, how can you fix it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I guess, you know, that comes to my next question, you know, how important is it for managers to strive to be leaders, and what can they do to do that?
Well, I think it's a great point. I think there's a lot of work that's been done by a guy called John Kotter. And he is a professor at Harvard Business School, and he talks about you know, a leader being a balance between the operational and the strategic side. You know, so for example, it would be something like you know, on the operational side, you have somebody who is talking. because they've got to talk, they've got to be directive, this is what we've got to do today, this is what's got to happen.
Very task orientated.
Exactly right. But on the leadership side, you have somebody who's listening, somebody who is engaging. You know, on one hand, with an operational style leader, he talks about people who are maybe very, you know, as a manager, you need to keep a little bit of emotional distance. You know, you can't get too close to the person necessarily that you're managing. Yeah. But on the other side, you have the leader who needs to capture somebody's heart. So they need to have that emotional heart connection, you know. And so I think that's, if I've answered your question, that's really important. Why, you know, for managers to be a better leader, it's about understanding, you know, how much time should they spend on the dance floor and how much time should they spend on the balcony. Yeah. They need to have, you know, that perspective.
Yeah, and I've totally just actually had two sides of that same conversation where, you know, they're too distanced and they're sharing too much information, and then other one from the business and task side, and no personal and there's no interaction, and therefore there's no trust build. And then just recently I've had someone where they're oversharing, over friendly, too much on the floor, and whilst that's great and people think, oh, they're great people, they're not necessarily great leaders. And so it's about making that distinction about, well, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And you know, some people have that natural ability, but I actually believe that you can learn that. And that's what I do in the Influential Leaders program, is help you to understand, you know, what level of interaction is important. How do you build those relationships? How do you build trust? How do you build engagement, and then inspire your staff?
Correct. And I agree. And I also would say that being aware of, I like to call it, which hat are you wearing? You know? Yes, because it's a balance of operational and strategic. Like, we don't have leaders just sitting in a room somewhere strategizing all day. Most people have a functional role that they play, but to be a leader, as you know, you want people to follow you. So it's something that the people give to you. It's not something you can take. And so from that point of view, understanding in an operational context, okay, somebody's come to my office, there's a challenge, there's an issue, there's a problem. What do I do? Am I going to just talk and say, here's what you do? Yep. Or am I going to take a leader as a coach approach and maybe provide them with some questions to help them think about it and to work through it and develop them and grow them and help them to solve the problem themselves?
Yeah, and then that obviously builds that resilience in people and helps your company move forward. And I guess I actually heard someone say to me, can you have too many leaders in a business? And obviously from what I teach is, you know, you need to grow leaders to have a successful business. What, you know, what are your thoughts, and have you got any examples around, you know, building leaders within a business?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think helping people to become the best version of themselves. I used to look, when I think back on my own corporate career, that the greatest pleasure that I got in my job as a manager stroke leader was when somebody flapped their wings and flew away and got a bigger and better position in another organization or within the organization I was working in. There was nothing better than, while you wanted to retain that person in your team or whatever, there was nothing better than to see them growing and developing and feeling that you've made some sort of a contribution to that.
I actually absolutely agree. And I think it's about building that legacy part of your own career, because those people are now out in the world singing your praises. This is what I learned when I was under this person many, many years ago. And this is how I am here today because of what happened in the beginning of my career or at that part of my career. And I think, you know, that's the difference between a leader and someone who's bringing fear and goes and thinks, I don't want to develop people because I don't want them to leave. And that's, you know, not going to help your business, your culture.
Or I don't want to feel threatened, you know.
Yes.
I don't want to feel, you know, I don't have somebody who's too good, you know.
Yes.
Just in case they make me look bad. You know?
I have clients that come in and they're not getting the promotion because they're too good for the job that they're in. And so what happens? They leave, and it's not necessarily on good terms. So
yeah, exactly
very
right.
good. So what do you think is, what are the mistakes that you see happen in management and people that are having to manage a team?
I think the biggest mistakes that happen are that people are not really conscious of their own particular style. Look, if you read many studies, they'll tell you things like, you know, 50%, 45 to 50% of managers never actually get any formal management training. Yeah. How many times have we seen that, you know, the person who is made the manager, given the title, it's mainly due to tenure. Maybe they outlasted everybody else,
Yes.
or it's maybe due to the fact that somebody said, gee, David's really good at solving problems. How good would it be if he was the manager? That'd be brilliant. He'd be solving all our problems for us. And but you wake up one morning then when you're given that title of manager, and you have to manage a team of 4 people, and you've never done it before.
Yeah.
What tends to happen, what I've seen happen, and look, I'll take a little bit of on the chin myself. I may have been guilty of this myself, but you tend to take like a hybrid model. So you pick bits of previous managers or previous people you've worked with that you really liked. You take that stuff on board, and then you take the stuff from the people that you didn't like and you didn't get on so well with, or you didn't appreciate, and you discard that. And so you create a little, yeah, and you create a little hybrid of yourself, but it's not an authentic self, It's more a bit of, well, this seemed to work for this guy or girl that I worked with previously, so I'll use that. And I think it's really, the mistakes that I see managers making is that as a result of that hybrid version, you get the management style that I like to call, I think it's recognized, not me, what they call laissez-faire. So how many people have you met at an interview who say, what do you like at work? And they'll say, well, I don't like being micromanaged. I've never met anybody who likes to be micromanaged. So when the manager becomes the manager, they tend to say, I'm not going to micromanage.
Yes.
Hands off, no feedback, no nothing. And it's actually the worst thing they can do, because as a result, the person is screaming out for some feedback. Am I going well? Am I not going well? What should I be doing better? But they're taking this hands-off approach.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think people get mixed up between what is micromanagement and what is actually growing someone and developing someone, because you can't do that on mass scale. You can't develop someone, a whole team at one go, because you've got so many different styles, communication, behavior. If you're not considering all the generations, you're not considering all those different aspects of someone, then you're not going to be reaching them at their level. You're just doing what you think suits
Correct.
you.
And the other element of it is that people tend to, so then the manager may tend to go down the opposite end of the scale and say, well, you know what, I'm going to make sure that I'm in charge here. I'm the boss. I'm going to make sure that I control it. So it's my way or the highway.
Yes.
This is the way it's going to be. And so that has equal sort of restrictions, because people experience that as he or she has already made up their mind. There's no point in putting forward your ideas. It's his way or his or her way or the highway. So that can also be equally soul destroying for good team members. And both of those scenarios have the same outcome, where people just go through the motions or they leave.
True. So what do you suggest? I know that we use these management assessment tools in my business, and it's available for anybody that wants to see where they sit and what they can improve on. Tell us a little bit more about that. The leadership assessment.
Yeah. So what do I suggest? Well, I suggest that, and I mentioned this earlier on, how I came into this coaching arena, and even to my association with Great People Inside. And that is, I would encourage everybody to hire a coach. Top athletes, every top athlete who's ever won an Olympic medal has a coach. We've heard that cliche before. So I would certainly encourage that. And the reason that I would encourage that is because people, supported by an external party, being provided with those rich insights that an assessment in the right hands can provide to someone, that diagnostic to help them understand more, is really, really very powerful. And so it's definitely the approach that I would suggest for people going forward.
Yeah, great.
I've lost a bit of your question there. You need to bring
No, look, I think you've really hit the nail on the head. I think people need to understand who they are and what their style is, and then understand how to make the changes that they need to change to develop a high-performing team. Often
exactly
people that do get coached are high performers. They're ambitious. They want to get somewhere. They understand that they need a coach to get there. But what those next level down and are trying to aspire to get to that level is they don't recognize those are all the secret ingredients.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that what a coach helps with is, one of the leadership skills in any case is modeling behavior. So as a leader and as a manager, you're constantly on display. So when you start working with a coach, you observe how they manage particular situations with you in that confidential one-on-one or even in a group session, how they manage particular situations. So it helps you to model that behavior. And then when you see the information that you've gleaned for yourself from an assessment, you then get to understand the power of it in terms of it being in your hand with your team. I've seen so many managers saying, my team's not delivering their KPIs, let's send them all off for training. And off they go for some, what I like to call a sheep dip approach. Just dip them all in, all out, there they go, everybody. But people learn differently. People have different requirements. And it's not until you use some form of tool to help you really understand who you've got on your team, what are the gaps they have, what do they need, and what would be the best intervention to support them in their development.
Yeah, I totally agree. I see many businesses, they spend money on keynote speakers that come into the company and they inspire, and they, there's great ideas of people, how they want to be, and that's what they're going to do in their role, and how they're going to, participate in the company. But then they walk out the door and it might last a week, and then nothing's implemented or nothing's carried through, and there's no accountability. Whereas, if they'd invested that time on what we're talking about here is, understanding yourself, having a coach to pick out how you can work better and more effectively and be accountable to it, it's going to be way more money, way better money spent, way better time spent, because it only not develops that person, they then develop their team.
I call that, what you're describing there, of bringing in somebody from the outside, or that sheep dip approach, Teflon training, non-stick. Yeah. It just, everybody comes away feeling, really motivated and hyped up. And as you say, a week later, it's all back, head down, bum up. They're back into just doing what they, and revert it to self. Yeah. And I think I read a statistic once that said that even one of the best psychologists in the world only has a 30% chance of changing somebody to behave in a particular way. And so what I believe programs like yours provide to people is the opportunity to self-manage, the opportunity to heighten the awareness, which is the first step in the process, heighten the awareness as to how are you impacting others? How are they experiencing you? What does that feel like to them? Really getting close to that. Then deciding that, yes, I need to self-manage that, and having somebody like yourself in the corner, a coach in the corner, to help them with that responsibility and accountability. So that bringing that whole methodology together is so much more powerful than to have a off-the-shelf Teflon training program.
Teflon training program. I love it. I love it. So tell us a little bit more. We've got a changing economy, a changing environment coming through the business world today. And we're seeing it now, the first integration of millennials were coming through the business, and all the baby boomers and Generation X went, what are these people how can we get them to show up for an interview and wear shoes to an interview? And I've heard stories of, someone rocked up an interview in Converse, and if they rock up, and now we've got other generations that are coming through the workforce, like Generation Z and Ys and As. So look out, I think this is the time where baby boomers are going, I'm out of here. What can I do? But how important is it? Because I think it's a real opportunity. It's not a negative, but it is about, again, having that self-awareness and that someone to support you to understand how to behave and communicate across the board to the different generations. So tell us a little bit more about how having an assessment around managing generations is going to help someone to do that.
Great. Well, the first thing I'd like to start by saying is acknowledging that I am a baby boomer. So there's nothing, when you think about the other generations, there's so many times, we've all seen the comments, like, okay, boomer, as kind of some form of a put down. So I'm coming from the place of saying, get to know me, walk a mile in my shoes. So it's very difficult for a baby boomer to truly understand who that other person, regardless of the pigeonhole we've put them in. So who are they? So they may be a millennial, as you say, Gen X, Gen Y, whatever they are. And so again, it comes back to the reason why you would use an assessment is to help people understand one another. So it's about using it on both sides of the scale to help the other generations and all the generations relate more effectively with one another. That's critical. And how many times have we met somebody socially or business-wise, and we make an assumption? So I'm sure before we had our conversation today, the last thing you might have associated with me would be in a pair of overalls up a ladder painting a wall. So how could you use that information? So everything we learn about people complements that whole three-dimensional element of who the person is. So we need all the help we can get, and using something like the leadership assessment, which measures contemporary dimensions. So, I've met so many across the generations that people would say, "Oh yes, those assessments. I've taken one of them. I did one. and they'll describe themselves in a particular box methodology.
And, they pigeonhole. Yeah,
pigeonhole themselves. And actually, we're far more complex than that. And so, what we recommend is that you need to understand, if you're aspiring to be a leader, well, you need to understand more about specific leadership dimensions. So things like strategy, which is a key element of a leader, part of our assessments, vision, what a leader does in terms of creating vision. Even that whole, as we talked about earlier on, that whole VUCA environment, that whole volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment. If we look back over the last 2 years and reflect on how do we manage ourselves in that environment where we were living in a world where we didn't know whether we could go out or stay in. We had to work from home. We didn't know what we were doing. There was lots of people confused and uncertain. It was very uncertain. Some people thrived in that environment. Some people really struggled. Yeah. And so it's the more information that you can have about each other and share with one another, and the more contemporary the tools. So I usually like to remind people and say, look, if you think of the older assessments, think of the original mobile phone. Remember, if you're old enough to, if not, Google it. Maybe you're old enough just to remember a Nokia. Think of the Nokia and what it did. And I looked at a James Bond movie the other night, and he was using one of the Nokias. And I suppose at the time, that was probably really cool. And now we think of the power of what an iPhone 13 has in terms of its technology. It's the exact same. This whole industry of assessments, etc., and coaching for that matter, have evolved at a lightning speed. So if that helps in terms of why I think people should use assessments to help with their self-management and self-knowledge.
Yeah, great. No, I absolutely agree. And that's one of the reasons why I partner with Great People Inside and you, David, so that my clients are able to have an insight and specific insight. So it's not a generally, this is what your personality is. It's specific. This is what you need to work on when you're coming as a leader and strategy. This is what you need to work on in difficult situations. And now, this is what you need to work on in managing multiple generations. And for those of people out there that are just at that mid-level and they're aiming to get to the next level of leadership and management within their firms and in their career, this is so important for you, because over the next 10, 15 years, you are going to be dealing with multiple of different people, of way they communicate, the way they see the world, the way that they are motivated. All of these aspects are things that you as a leader now need to know.
100%, because
not being taught it anywhere.
That's right. They haven't. They have to have them. And really, it's we're also being flawed human beings. We tend to have this unconscious bias. Yeah. So we immediately look at a baby boomer and say, well, they probably don't know much about IT and technology. They struggle to check into Coles supermarket with their barcode. And
yet now there's 80-year-olds on Zoom and on Facebook. Right. It's awesome.
So that bias doesn't belong anywhere, And so I think they say at any one time in the working force, there's 3 or 4 generations that are occupying it. And as an upcoming manager, really understanding, and it's one of the dimensions we have in the assessment, is around specifically around managing generations. You really need to understand what your natural tendencies are there and what is it you need to self-manage.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are the benefits of this? So if someone takes this assessment, the leadership assessment, which includes managing generations aspect and the attributes that are required, what's going to happen for them once they've done this assessment and come through a workshop with myself?
Yep. So what they learn are, as I said, really rich insights into their own personal natural tendencies. The reporting that we provide to you and which you pass on to them is very very much written in plain English language, plain language. When I say plain English language, it's available in 24 different languages. So if you want it in your own native tongue, that's fine too. I'm sure we have it for you. And that plain language allows you to, as I mentioned earlier on, what I like to call hold a mirror up to yourself, see what your natural tendencies are. A great example that I can give you is around the dimension of teamwork, which is a good leadership dimension to really understand. We're all very familiar with desires that people have when they talk about teamwork and bringing people into the team. And what they're looking for is somebody who can very capable of working autonomously, but loves working in a team.
Yeah.
The really sad news is that person hasn't been born yet.
Yes.
They just haven't been born.
It's an oxymoron.
Exactly right. And so when I talk about self-management, this is exactly what I'm talking about. But being aware of that, look, I tend to be more independent. So maybe you're really good at managing teams when you're calling the shots, but maybe you're not so good at participating in teams. And so how might you deal with that? Yeah. How might you manage that? And so what you learn from a course such as yours and working with the assessments, you'll get specific guidance around how you should approach that. What might be the best method in terms of self-managing that? What are the strategies that you can be provided with? Because as you talked about with Teflon training earlier on, what's unique about the coaching approach is that having somebody to hold you to account to your commitments and your development areas allows you to develop the self-management habit. And if you want to think about how that works from a day-to-day basis, just think about yourself. You may fit in a camp of being, you really enjoy being around people. I love being around people, I love meeting new people. Or, you know what, I can take it or leave it, or you know what, I don't really like it.
Yeah.
But guess what? When you have to go to an event and if you're in the camp that doesn't really like meeting people, you can do it. And that's what we mean by self-management. Being able to do it almost like, think of driving home in your car. You get home at the end of the day and you go, I don't remember going through the traffic lights at wherever it might be. Yeah. I don't remember any of that because you're actually self-managing how you drive, if that helps.
Yeah, well, it's like the tennis player, the ball's coming at him at 100 kilometers an hour, but because they've hit that ball 1,000 times and it's slow for them, they can see it happening. Whereas Correct. That's where you want to be as a leader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what the coach can do as you develop, if you take the tennis analogy another step forward, the coach can help you to think about just the ball. Think about looking at the ball as you play the stroke.
Where to focus.
Yeah, what you need to, exactly right, what you need to focus on.
Yeah, great. Oh, well, thanks, David. Well, I think it's been a great time we've spent with you today. Was there anything else that you wanted to add or have a...
Anything I'd like to add? I would encourage everybody, as I say, I can't emphasize it enough. We talk about coaching. I'm going to give everybody a little bit of mentoring now for the benefit of my experience. And the benefit of my experience is that unless you embrace coaching and support and development, your growth level will be slower than if you engage with the coach and access their knowledge and ability, and particularly you should engage obviously with Sarah and access their knowledge and their insights that they can provide you with, rather than trying to reinvent that for yourself. So the only thing I would add from a mentoring point of view is continue on your self-development journey and work with somebody who can help you, such as yourself, to develop those key attributes that you need to self-manage as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you that are interested, we do have the assessment available. It's very inexpensive to find out this information. So contact us. There should be a link below or somewhere on the page where you can actually go through, see what the assessment's about, download it, take the assessment, which will be, I think it's 20 minutes assessment. And we then help you understand the tools and give you opportunity to work on yourself, grow your leadership so that you are inspiring others. Your culture and your business will change, but also it means that you're going to have a fruitful, successful career.
Great.
Awesome.
Couldn't agree more.
All right. Well, thanks, David.
Thanks a million, Sarah.